Hi, everyone. I think we're going to start. I'm Brenda Gunn, and I'm the Associate University Librarian for Special Collections and Preservation at the University of Virginia Library, and I'm so appreciative of all of you being here this afternoon. And on behalf of my colleagues here on the table, we're delighted to be talking to you about our project called On These Grounds. The project is a collaborative venture to create, test, and disseminate a linked open data ontology that represents the lived experiences of the enslaved and free Black people who labored for colleges and universities. The ontology is built around life events and is shaped from the surviving archival evidence within the partners' repositories. The project partners are from 7 colleges and universities and have been implementing the descriptive model based on their archival materials. These collaborative teams of historians, archivists, metadata specialists, and technologists have developed a rich set of promising practices and lessons learned that will be valuable to the university studying slavery community. In this roundtable, representatives from those institutions will share their experiences with you, and the topics that they'll cover include situating their work in the context of their institution's involvement with slavery, the process of assessing the state of their archival holdings, managing productive collaborations between historians, archivists, librarians, metadata specialists, and technologists, and creating local workflows and implementation practices, working with students in the testing process, and thinking about audiences and end users for this kind of information. So I'd like to introduce our panelists before we get started, and starting from the end is Jessie Bayker, who's the Digital Archivist and Research Project Manager at the Scarlet and Black Research Center at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. Jessie has contributed chapters to 2 volumes of the Scarlet and Black book series published by Rutgers University Press, and which focuses on the history and legacy of slavery and dispossession at Rutgers. Bayker curates the Scarlet and Black Digital Archive, which uses historical primary sources to shed light on African American history at Rutgers from slavery to the present. He also researches transgender history in the United States and holds a PhD in history from Rutgers. Next is Anna Lacy. Anna Lacy is the Metadata Project Coordinator for Archival Collections at Georgetown University. Anna works collaboratively with the Georgetown Library staff to identify archival materials and test the application of the linked open data model. She also manages a team of student workers. Anna is a PhD candidate in history at the University of Delaware, and as of November 1st, she'll be starting a new position as the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Haverford College. To Anna's right is Mary Beth Corrigan, who has helped the Booth Family Center for Special Collections assess its holdings related to slavery, plan for the digitization of the archives of Maryland Province of the Society of Jesus, support faculty and student research projects on slavery, and develop instructional materials on slavery. She has collaborated on digital projects, most notably On These Grounds. She completed her doctoral studies at the University of Maryland, College Park, where she wrote her dissertation on the Black family and community in the District of Columbia. Next is Paula Kiser, who is the Digital Scholarship Librarian and Assistant Professor at Washington and Lee University. Paula earned her MS in Information Science from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and her MA in History from James Madison University. She teaches courses in the Digital Culture and Information program on digital collections and exhibits and on humanities data. Her work focuses on digital collections, digital preservation, and scholarly communications. Her research focuses on topics such as information literacy, primary source instruction by undergraduate instructors, and open education resources. And rounding out our panel is Caroline Emmons, who is the Elliott Professor of History at Hampden-Sydney College. She has teaching and research interests in African American history, 20th century U.S. history, and Caribbean history. She is the acting director of the new Center for Public History at Hampden-Sydney and also currently serves as an assistant dean of the faculty. Her publications have focused on mid-century civil rights and particularly NAACP issues. She is the editor of a collection of essays on the impact of the Cold War and McCarthyism on American society and served as a Fulbright scholar in the Slovak Republic. To get us started with a good introduction on the On These Grounds project, I have a video that was put together by Sharon Leon, who is the project director for On These Grounds. Sharon is an associate professor of digital history at Michigan State University and the director of the Omeka family of web publishing platforms. So, let me get this started.
Hi everyone, I'm Sharon Leon and I'm the project director for the On These Grounds project. I really wish I could be with you today for conversation, but my friends and colleagues, led by Brenda Gunn, who is going to sort of steer the ship for the rest of our time together, have asked me to take a few moments to introduce you to the On These Grounds project. So I'm going to share my So On These Grounds is an effort to describe the lived experience of enslaved people who labored at colleges and universities. You might have gathered that much. But we want to tell you a little bit about the origins of the project. The project has been running for 2 years now with funding from the Mellon Foundation. And it grew out of some of my own research, which you can see here. There's a sort of very slight difference in the graphic presentation of On These Grounds and Life and Labor Under Slavery, the Jesuit Plantation Project, which is my own research project about the enslaved people who were owned by the Order of Priests who founded Georgetown University. And while I was doing that project, I came to believe that it might be possible for us to think about a way that all of the colleges and universities who had information about slavery related to their institution of higher education could describe the experiences of those enslaved people. And that would give us a way to start to learn something about this particular kind of enslavement that we couldn't see if everyone took a different approach. And as the University Studying Slavery organization was growing, founded in 2014 and growing right up to this day, it seemed to me urgent that we turn to try and do this together. And so with Brenda Gunn and Harriet Hamasi from Georgetown University, we approached the Mellon Foundation for funding to develop a descriptive model, which you'll hear more about today, a descriptive model that all of us could share. That model is called an event ontology. We lead with events because we think it's important to, as much as possible, to provide finely graded description of the lived experiences of these enslaved people. So not only to name them and describe their relationships to one another, but also to talk about what happens in their day-to-day life as it appears in the archival record. And so that ontology has 3 classes and 4 kinds of things and lots of properties. Properties are just the fields that show up in a data entry form for a web application. The heart of the model really is a controlled vocabulary, which gives us a full 17 set of categories of kinds of events and really 105 different kinds of events that we have seen across 2 years of testing. It's fully documented, and it comes with a set of resource templates that make it easy for people to set up with their own installation of Omeka S. In the summer of 2021, we made a call for testing partners, and you're going to talk to lots of them today about their experiences working with the model. For the last year, with their own archival collections, they've been developing sites like Hampden-Sydney's, like Rutgers, like the University of Georgia's, like Washington and Lee's, based on their own holdings and their own archival materials. Not everyone has pushed publish on their materials, but I think you'll learn an awful lot about the experience of working with the model, the experience of doing this kind of work in lots of different kinds of institutions and situations, and I hope you're looking forward to a vibrant conversation and discussion today. I really wish I could be with you. Hi.
Don't tell Sharon, but once is enough. Probably. We miss Sharon too. We wish she could be here. Okay, for where we want to go now, we've assembled this stellar panel, and they do have much experience over the last year and a half of working through this model in their own institutions, and their institutions are very different in size and in the resources that they have to put to the project. So I think that you will find the discussion very enlightening and hopefully encouraging, in that you'll want to bring this to your home institution as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pose them questions, and then they will just have a discussion amongst themselves, and then at the end we'll invite questions from all of you. So I think we'll start with a question about context. Would you all tell us briefly about your institution's historical context with slavery? Who's wanting to start first? We had a discussion about this, and I think they wanted a little more structure. I said, just whoever goes first. Jesse, yeah, Jesse's gonna go first.
All right, I'll kick this off. Hello, I'm Jesse Bayker from Rutgers University, and so our institutional context is that we are so far the only institution participating so far in this project that is in the North. So we are the State University of New Jersey, so that really affects the types of events that we're able to find in our records. So that's one piece of context that's important. The other piece of context that's important is that we are one of the 9 colonial colleges, number 8 out of 9. Our institution was founded initially it was called Queen's College, and it was founded in 1766, so before the Revolution. And it was founded by a group of Dutch Reformed ministers and merchants who, although they placed the college in New Jersey at a town called New Brunswick, this was a school for the Dutch colonial elites of New York and New Jersey. So when we look at our history with slavery, in terms of our institutional records, we've so far found one instance where we can definitively say that an enslaved person's labor was paid for by the school directly to their enslaver to hire them, and that's the only record in our institutional history. But then when we look at the personal lives of the people who had founded the college and were funding the college, we see that many of them, their fortunes were built on participating in the transatlantic slave trade. They owned plantations, some of them in the Caribbean, and that money is flowing to the institution. And that's an important piece of the context for us.
My name is Mary Beth Corrigan, and I'm from Georgetown. And I think most of you sitting in this audience are aware that in 1838, the Maryland Jesuits sold more than 272 people, removing them from their families and sending them to Louisiana. And a substantial part of the proceeds of that sale went to allay the debts of Georgetown College. What is, I think, also important to recognize about Georgetown is that Georgetown was the lead academy of the Jesuits whose predecessors founded Maryland, so that their practice of holding enslaved people dates probably back to the late 18th century. I would say that's at the earliest. It's quite possible it was as early as 1650, the Jesuits engaged in slaveholding. So that the Jesuits held more than 1,200 people enslaved, and also, too, they evangelized among those people. The story was well known. Especially historians of colonial Chesapeake have used our records pretty extensively. And also, too, it was noted in the institutional history written by Emmett Curran that was published in 1789. In 2016, Georgetown began to take steps to take institutional responsibility for that. And just to kind of explain that there's been a variety of resources, and I'll get into this more later, that have been established to make available, that make this history available to people in at least the documentary fashion. A lot of work done by students, a lot of oral histories done by people who are descended from the people who were sold. And two, that the university itself is beginning to talk more comprehensively about their responsibility to the people who were descended from all of the people who were enslaved by the Jesuits. So it's truly ongoing, and it's a discussion that I hope is changing the university.
Paula Kiser from WNL. So WNL was founded in 1749, and I need to make sure I get all of these dates correctly because our director of institutional history is sitting in the back. So, and there were several name changes that I won't get into, but the university, when it was Washington College, was bequeathed, I think, 74 people, and up until that point, of course, it was built by enslaved people. Everybody who worked there most likely had servants who were enslaved people, but the college itself didn't own anyone until John Robinson passed away in 1836, and he bequeathed individuals to the college. They never worked, that we know of, they never worked on the college campus, but they stayed in what was Hart's Bottom and were hired out. And then in 1836, those who were still able to work were sold. And so that's where most of our documents currently are about that part of history, although we know that professors, trustee members, students, there's a lot more research that we need to do to see the actual history of the work that enslaved people did on our campus and related to our institutional history. But this is just our kind of first step of going through the documents that we have in our archive.
Caroline Emmons from Hampden-Sydney College, which is a small liberal arts college about 60 miles south of where we sit now. It is a predominantly white institution. It is also one of the few remaining all-male institutions in the country, and it was as I say, founded in 1775, and when I came to the college in 1998, I was surprised to hear from our official college historian when I asked him that the college had no history or involvement with slavery, which was surprising to me for an 18th century school in South Central Virginia. And that turns out that was not correct. So one of the things that we've been learning, and I think we are not alone in having a similar story. The college did not directly own enslaved people, but it leased them, and when the Presbyterian Synod in that area founded the college, it used the revenue from leasing out enslaved individuals to finance the early operations of the college. And I know that's not an uncommon story for some of these southern schools particularly. So what we know now, and we can talk more about this as we go along, is that the leadership of the college, the trustees of the college, the faculty, and the students all were involved with slavery, many of them, most of them maybe, and brought these individuals to campus with them. It transforms the way I think we often think about sort of the lived environment of campus during that period. In 1812, the college started a theology department, which became an independent institution in 1822. That's Union Theological Seminary, which moved to Richmond in the 1890s. So we also, I think, are sort of grappling with more institutions than we thought we would have to deal with in this work, and I think we're not alone in that. We can talk more about that. And then in the 1830s, Hampden-Sydney basically leased its charter to the Medical College of Virginia, which operated as a department of Hampden-Sydney until the 1850s. And so some of you may know VCU is doing work on the history of MCV, but that early period, that first 15 years or so, MCV operated as a department of Hampden-Sydney.
Great, thank y'all for that context. And so I'm wondering now if you would share with us what, if anything, has been done at your institution to address the history, or has the On These Grounds project provided support to establish examination at your institutions?
Shall we go in reverse order? Sure. Let's mix it up. Yep. So we have been, a lot of the work I think at Hampden-Sydney have been done in a kind of piecemeal fashion by those of us who were interested in this topic, but it was not particularly well organized. And we had been discussing the possibility of starting to do what I'll call a census, for lack of a better term, as we got into 2021. And then this conference, which is, I know, important to so many of us in so many ways, played a key role in, I think, the spring. It was a virtual conference in 2021, and we heard about the On These Grounds project with some of the people that we are hearing from today. And so we thought that seemed like an interesting model. And what, I know we'll talk more about this, but what was helpful to me, and I'm not trained in digital humanities, I'm really trying to learn a lot of new tricks here with this project, but to shift from trying to create a census to an accounting based on events, to go through the documentary record and look for events rather than individuals. And that was a very transformative, I think, that was a moment of sort of epiphany for us that has been really helpful in working through the documentary record. So we had done the work in a very piecemeal fashion. I know we'll talk more about this, but OTG gave us a way to structure that and to also change the way we were approaching the project to look at events instead of individuals. And so as we worked through as I say, the documentary record, that has been a very rich approach for us.
I also realized that I didn't tell you where WNL was, so sorry. We're in Lexington, Virginia, which is only about an hour away. It's south on 81 a little bit. I think that's just the WNL mindset of like, how could you not know where we were? But this work had actually been done for many years. There was the working group on African Americans at WNL, which was started by the late Dr. Ted Delaney. And he did amazing work there. So working with faculty and a lot of individual researchers working on students, and this was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it was being done, but in sort of small little pockets. And then especially after the events here at UVA in 2017, there was the Commission on Institutional History and Community that was then a top-down administrative level push that this had to be done holistically, programmatically. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was the creation of Dr. Lynn Rainville's position of our Director of Institutional History. And we've also, as the institution has been working with genealogists to look into the history of descendants, there have been a lot of student projects as well. So there was a foundation of research, and we knew a lot of the documents that we had in our archives before we heard about the OTG project, and it was a new way for us to interact with that information and to think about it and present it and organize it that was really attractive to us.
At Georgetown, when the working group was working on its report and reviewing Georgetown, really trying to make recommendations as to what actions Georgetown could take to repair the relationships that were broken because of slavery, they developed the Georgetown Slavery Archive, which is still probably the primary interface that people use to discover documents on slavery as it relates to Georgetown. And the focus on that site is enslavement at Georgetown College, and it provides individual descriptions of items that have been selected from our larger collections, and then also transcribed. So especially for classroom use, they're extremely useful. As part of the working group report, they recommended that the library digitize its holdings for the archives of the Maryland province of the Society of Jesus. And it's not a technicality, but the Maryland province owned the enslaved people who were sold and owned the enslaved people who worked on the plantations that supported their missions and their schools. And so we are now in the process of completing the digitization of that. So you may ask, why do we do On These Grounds? And to me, On These Grounds provides an important supplement, because most people, when they ask questions about slavery, and they're going to ask questions that may be hyper-local, they may be asking questions that are very general. They generally don't think about the way records are organized. I like to think about the structures of authority within the Jesuits. First of all, I think it's fascinating. Secondly, it helps me understand where I can expect to find records and why things are left out. But for most people who are interested, especially in just learning something about their place or learning something about their family, the event-centered model is really helpful. And in Georgetown's case, too, since we have sacramental records, and the 1838 sale is an extremely well-documented transaction. We have the names of people who were planned to be sold. We have the names of people who were actually shipped from Alexandria to New Orleans. We have the names of people as the debts were being paid off. So it's an extremely well-documented sale. And so On These Grounds provides a really great opportunity for people to begin to trace some of the names that are related to the really Jesuit slaveholding as a whole.
So at Rutgers, really the conversation about the institutional history with slavery began in 2016, so not so long ago. This was the 250th anniversary of the school's founding, and this is when kind of the institution, the administration woke up to the demands of students to grapple with this history in a holistic way, and they really started realizing that, well, we don't know what to grapple with because we don't really even know what is this history. So this is when professors, Dr. Deborah Gray White and Marisa Fuentes in our history department with a group of graduate students who were studying African-American history at Rutgers went into the archives and started turning up lots of information about the way that Rutgers history intersected with slavery history in New Jersey. So the first thing that we did in 2016 was publish a book with essays by these doctoral students who had gone in the archive and explored how the university was funded in its first couple of generations, and also explored, importantly, the local history of enslavement in the city of New Brunswick, in Middlesex County, in New Jersey, because we felt that that's part of our mission with our project, is to really address some of the gaps in public knowledge about slavery in New Jersey and the extent of slavery and the importance of slavery as an institution in this northern state, where a lot of residents of New Jersey really don't realize how important and how long-lasting this institution was there. So that's what we did with the book. It was called Scarlet and Black, Volume 1, Slavery and Dispossession in Rutgers History. Of course, for those that don't know, scarlet is our school color. This is where the name Scarlet and Black came from. And then we did, after publishing the book, we did create, and I curated the Scarlet and Black Digital Archive that really used Georgetown Slavery Archive as a model to create an Omeka site with transcriptions of some documents from our archives. And then what On These Grounds, when the opportunity came up last year, and Sharon talked to me about getting involved with On These Grounds on this project, I thought it was a great opportunity to think about how we can represent these relationships with linked open data, because as you know, I'm a historian by training, and I was playing the role of digital archivist and trying to do the things that archivists do, which is describe records, right, and that are in our holdings, but there was a level of frustration there with not having the ability to link the people and the different events if they appeared in lots of different collections that were actually apart in the physical archive, but bringing those things together so that you could find these, a lot of our holdings, it's about finding a needle in a haystack for us in New Jersey in terms of this history. So being able to piece things together and bring things together and link them up was very important, and being able to provide that sort of layer of interpretive descriptive text that went with the documents, I thought would be very powerful and take it to the next level beyond just saying this is what the document itself says and this is who created it. Right? We do have a desire to put our interpretation onto these documents, and this model allows us to do that.
Thank y'all. From the very beginning, the project partners, the lead partners, had a vision that we wanted this project to be very collaborative and interdisciplinary, and bringing together different people within an institution, different roles within a library, and also reaching out to historians and researchers to help build this model. So I'd like to ask all of you if you could speak to your experiences with internal collaborations, or whether you had sufficient staff to collaborate, to form a collaboration.
I can start. So I'm Anna, and I'm at Georgetown. And we were actually able to bring together an interdisciplinary team. And I think one big difference with our institution is that we have a full-time staff member who's just working on this project. So I'm working on the project. And in really simple terms, Mary Beth was sort of the expert on the collections materials at the institution. Emily Baldoni, who's not here today, is the linked data and metadata expert. And then I also come to this with disciplinary training in history and experience working with students on other digital history projects. And then we also engaged with others in the history department and in the library at Georgetown. And we also have a team of student workers too, and you'll hear a little bit more about this.
We had a lot fewer than that. So ours was mostly in the library. We had one person in institutional history to provide that extra context to really help us understand what we were seeing in the documents, because they were confusing, to say the least. But we have a DH librarian, thank goodness, because we wouldn't have been able to implement Omeka quite as nicely otherwise. Myself, as the digital scholarship librarian, I kind of come in anytime someone says the word data or metadata. We have a staff person in the archives who he had actually worked closely with Dr. Rainville in digitizing, because one of the things with this project is that the funding wasn't going to cover digitization, and so luckily we had already done that. And then we had a couple of students. So we did have a team, which was good, because it would have been impossible to do this sort of work if it was added on to the work we were already doing, if it was just one person. So by spreading it out among multiple people, it made it possible.
That's a good segue. So we had a team of 4 that was interdisciplinary, a colleague in art history, myself from history, our director of the library, and then our first archivist in almost 250 years, and a digital projects librarian too. So I think that we did struggle, and we do struggle with being understaffed. And this is work that was added on to the full-time job descriptions that we already had. So I think that the collaboration has been very, very meaningful. I feel like that's been very satisfying as part of this work, but you had to find a group of people who really want to do this and think it's important, because it was sort of extra on top of things that were already happening. And it was very fortunate that we had hired Sarah Almond, who I'm looking at, because none of us had expertise in Omeka. So that was another critical piece. It would not have been possible. Now, having said all of that, one of the things that has been really satisfying is to come together in our meetings and talk about the documents and the sources that we're looking at, because we don't all necessarily have the same ideas about descriptive language, and we don't have the same ideas about how we might assign them into some of the categories that we might get into more discussion of. I have found that historians are more comfortable making inferences than archivists are. So that, so working through some of those differences has been, I think, really interesting and satisfying. But as I say, because at least at my school, where we had nothing even close to the ability to assign this to somebody full-time or even part-time, it was an add-on. And so it was really important that we had a group of people who felt like the work was really important and needed to be done.
Thank you. And one of the things I want to follow up to something you said, Caroline, is about description and the different ways that historians and librarians and archivists may approach that. Sharon may have mentioned this in her introduction, but it bears repeating that this model is a descriptive model, and it's an attempt to standardize, have a standardized vocabulary for describing the enslaved laborers and the enslaved individuals who labored for colleges and universities, and specifically around this event ontology. So yeah, it's all about description. So let's.
Rutgers left.
Oh.
What did your team look like, Jesse?
So I have a very small team at Rutgers, and so in terms of interdisciplinary collaboration, my collaborator, we do have a DH librarian who was a part of our team, really in terms of, this is a person who supports different kinds of digital humanities projects, so she did that for us in terms of helping us install Omeka S and figure out how to work with that platform and clearing up some of the technical issues at the beginning. In terms of actually doing the work of creating the data, it's really was me and one graduate student who was assigned 6 hours a week to this project. Now, I work at the Scarlet and Black Research Center at Rutgers, which actually is a research center that is basically like a history research lab that grew out of the Scarlet and Black project. And I have a group of graduate students and postdocs that work with us, but the challenge was getting somebody assigned to the digital piece, because most of our students and postdocs are working on other forms of narrative histories, doing the research and writing, books and articles about New Jersey African American history. So I was able to get one student to participate in this project over the past year, and I'll have another one this year to continue helping us create that data.
Sorry about trying to skip over you, Jesse. But you have a great segue to the next question, which is about how you've been able to bring students into the work. And so you mentioned students, Jesse. Do you want to expand on that? And I know Anna has quite a bit that she has to share.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Anna more and learn from her, because we are, as I mentioned, I have one student that I've been working with over the past year, a graduate student, and I think that we really are looking to build up our capacity to include undergraduate student researchers in this work. That's kind of the next frontier with us. Definitely have some students that are very interested and eager to participate as undergraduate researchers, and I'd love to hear more from people who have actually involved undergraduates.
So we had the largest team of student researchers. We hired 8 students over the last academic year, and we had anywhere between 3 and 7 students working on the project at one time. So we had 7 in the spring semester, we had 3 over the summer, we have 4 this fall. And our students worked anywhere between 6 and 10 hours per week during the academic year, and then anywhere between 15 and 35 in the summer, depending on how many courses they were taking. And the students came from a ton of different backgrounds, so they weren't just in history. And I will say, so we only had 1 graduate student in history working with us over the summer. Most were undergraduate students with very limited experience working with archival materials. And we had our students creating these event records. So we gave them materials that were highly structured, so things that were relatively predictable, like tax assessment documents, inventories, sacramental registers, things that kind of followed a pattern. We found that it was difficult to give students things that were more unpredictable, like correspondence or diaries, where you don't really know what you're going to find or if you're going to find materials in those records. I was able to give that to our grad student, but not the undergrads. And we had the students kind of doing both ends of this work. So they were doing the interpretive and the descriptive work. So they were, analyzing the documents, and then they were sort of applying the descriptive model. And then we also had them creating the records on Omeka, and we had them using the kind of resource template, so it's sort of how you manually create a record. And then we also had them using the CSV import module, so they could do this in bulk. I think the big takeaway was you have to build in lots of flexibility here. It was a weird year. We had lots of disruption. And we found that it took the students a lot more time to create those records and be comfortable with the primary source material. Getting them to work on Omeka was pretty easy. It didn't take that much time. I mean, we had a couple meetings and we did some troubleshooting, but they were off and running. But what we really had to devote the time was teaching them how to interpret those materials. And we had ongoing conversations. And we actually didn't have students on Omeka until the spring semester. So I was if we can't get them to interpret and describe the materials, we will have no records. But I think the difference was that I was working with the students full time, so that I had the time and the capacity to do that. And it was a lot of meetings too. I mean, Mary Beth can attest.
Absolutely
Tons
true.
of student meetings.
Had our door closed with Zoom on a sign, no, do not disturb, for quite a few hours a week, so.
So we had 2 undergraduate students, and they worked about 5 hours a week, but this was on top of their work-study work that they already had, so usually the On These Grounds was sort of the thing that kind of fell away. But we were having them do transcription of items we'd already identified, so they needed to have some paleographic training to begin with because they weren't all that familiar with the script from the 19th century. Although it was really quite readable. I mean, I looked at that and was like, wow, I wish my handwriting was that nice. So they did transcription, and then we also would meet with them afterwards and talk about what we were seeing in the document, what were the events that were happening in there, and then we had them create using the spreadsheet template and go through. And it was very formulaic, but we wanted them to see the whole process through, to really be able to feel like they had ownership of a document and to go through all of the steps of the process. It also meant we didn't get a whole lot done because the documents that we had were rather lengthy and rather complex. So I think that the students coming away had a very fulfilled experience from doing the work. Could have done more if we just did it ourselves, but I'm glad that we used students because that did it made them feel some ownership of that work.
We were not successful in bringing students into the project. And I think if one of the goals for this panel is to encourage all the different kinds of institutions that are represented here to think about how this model might work at your school, you've seen now, so we sort of moved down the line. And we talked about it a lot, but I think because a lot of our records are scattered across multiple institutions, and because, as we've heard mentioned, that the training itself is a very time-consuming activity, and because we were learning the model, that all just started to seem overwhelming. So I've been inspired by hearing from some of you all about work that you're doing with undergraduate students, and so that's encouraged me to go back and have us think about this some more. But as I said, given the volume of other things that we wanted to do, we just couldn't see a way to bring them in, given the constraints on resources and time. So not a great answer to that question, but
That's real.
it's an honest answer. Yeah, it's an honest answer.
Shifting a little bit, I'm wondering if you could share your perspectives on who the audiences and the stakeholders are for a project like this and this work.
I mean, we see this as being relevant to anyone who is either associated with the university or has any interest in the history of enslaved people in the United States. I mean, the goal, right, the bigger goal of On These Grounds is that if we're all making these data sets with the same descriptive model, then we can have one data set to rule them all, right? We put all of our information together, and then it makes it that much more useful and powerful. So we want this information to be useful for descendants groups. We also want it to be useful for people doing research on enslaved people on college campuses. We think it's important to also show our board of trustees that this is work that is relevant, and this is work that we are doing, and it's a part of our institution's history that you may not be very excited about, but we've got the documents. This is what it is. So the audience we see are everyone.
I think that's a great answer. I think that's perfectly said. If we have the potential, I think, to gather information and data and sources from across any institution that eventually joins the model. And that in itself, I think, will be very, very powerful in countering, I started talking about the college historian who told me there was no connection. So, and we know that those narratives are still out there. I guess that's the heritage version of higher education that we've heard discussed over the last couple of days. So I think in that sort of global sense, this is an opportunity to really pull together a very powerful, almost a brief, I think, showing that here's the real history and we can document it and this is what it looks like. And then, at a more granular level, we have very different kinds of institutions represented up here. That is also, I think, very helpful to understand what the institution of slavery looked like in different kinds of schools and different places and different times. And so we're doing that work, but this is a way to bring together a more accessible, I think, body of information. On my campus, there are other audiences. We have not been successful at Hampden-Sydney in getting a presidential charge or a commission. We have been able to join USS. We have been able to join the OTG project. But when we ask for a sort of top-down charge of that nature, we have not been successful. So I think for those of us working on the project, this is a chance to document more thoroughly and more persuasively, maybe, that this is a history that we have to acknowledge, and that we can demonstrate through the sources and materials we're pulling together. What I don't think we anticipated, like I said, is bringing in. We knew about Union Theological Seminary. I don't think we knew about MCV fully, and so that has been very difficult, and so that's we've bitten off more than I think we realized that we were, but that's all to the good also. So I think we have those campus audiences, and I will say my students that I've talked to about this project, they are keenly interested in this. The students they know and they want to know more. So the alumni maybe don't want to know so much. Maybe the administration isn't sure how much they want to hear, but I think for the students, they're interested in the college doing better to acknowledge this history.
I'll jump in. I think another audience that we're thinking a lot about at Rutgers are our local communities in New Jersey. And this is something that, as part of our data model, we describe events, yes, and we link them to people, yes, but we also link them to places. And so what we're creating, and this is kind of part of our vision at Rutgers, is we deliberately called our website New Jersey Slavery Records, and you can find it at the website njslavery.org. And our hope is to be able to document through these different digitized archival sources and linked open data to document history of slavery in New Jersey much more broadly than just at Rutgers, because I think that's, as the State University of New Jersey, that that's our stakeholders, our local communities. And we want people to be able to go to this website and go to places and find their town, find their community, be able to click on it and see a list of people who are associated with slavery, whether they were enslavers or they were the enslaved. People in that community at some point, and a list of different events and things that were happening and sources that were produced out of that community, so they could start to gain a better understanding of the role of slavery in the history of their home community.
At Georgetown, we're in it's kind of a funny time to be talking about this because we have yet to, create our test site. We have. It's not published yet, sorry. But it's going to be published relatively soon, so, just hold on, folks, especially me. But when we speak of this internally, the primary constituents we think of, I think 85% of our conversations that center upon the students, faculty, and descendants. And the descendants are important because we have a lot of records that have names in them. And we are fully aware that even though this is an event model, event-centered model, that people are going to be using these records to research their families and also to research some of the places these families are from. Local history is part of, it goes hand in hand with genealogy. The other group of stakeholders, and I should say the Georgetown administration is interested in this primarily because it can reach the descendants. So when we think about this, we have to think about testing it for that. But there are some secondary stakeholders. I would say that that we know that there are people from other Jesuit institutions who are interested in our records because there is documentation of their relationship to the Maryland province. And some of you I recognize some people in this audience because of your work. And so that's a stakeholder. And then finally, we know because we have such a rich body of names, in a way, we're an important example for other institutions because if we are working on this vocabulary and this model, and we are contending with a large number of names, that it's an important example because there are very few, they're not, I don't want to say very few, but most universities don't have this type of documentary record.
Thanks. Let's talk just a minute about sustainability and sustaining the project, and where do you see the project going forward?
Well, I hope some of the members of our audience will want to know more about it. I think that the more participants, the stronger it will be, and the more comprehensive that record will become, and that will have a power in itself. So I think, again, on my campus, I think that I've been very grateful. I know the whole team has been grateful for being able to partner with institutions some of whom have been doing this work for a long time. It's helped give a kind of credibility and authority, I think, to things that we're interested in pursuing. So I think if you're a small institution like mine that is, shall we say, ambivalent about research into some of these areas, then being part of that bigger community has been very helpful and very important. So that answer is probably going to be different if you're Georgetown or, but for a small liberal arts college such as the one that I come from, and maybe yours too, but you all been doing this work longer, but maybe not as different, right? It's very helpful to be part of this bigger community and this bigger effort.
I know for us, it's also been really helpful that we have top-down support. So knowing that at the time, so one of the things that came with being a partner was getting paid for our labor to test the ontology. And so our staff member, so unless you didn't know, small liberal arts colleges, most staff members work 35 hours. So we were able to then pay the additional 5 hours to make it up to 40, where it's, heaven forbid, there's overtime. So those 5 hours, he did most of this work in those 5 hours. And when we can no longer pay extra and he's back to regular 35, this is where his supervisor, thank goodness, the head of the special collections is open about this, that we now need to carve out time to dedicate to this project. because it's not enough to say, yes, we want, as an institution, we value this research and you should be doing this, if you're not actually going to protect the time needed to do the work, because we are all wearing 15,000 hats. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really incorporate the On These Grounds into our workflow of finding anything related to slavery in our institutional records, always having that lens on as we're going through treasurer's minutes, treasurer's reports, trustees' minutes, that this is on that list of what do we do in processing our documents. And making sure that the head of special collections, the head of the library knows that, okay, maybe I can't take on another project because this doesn't go away. And this is important, and we'll be going through this stuff well after I'm retired, and that's a couple decades away.
I think part of the thing that has made this work possible for us over the past year has been the collaboration with the other universities that are part of this working group, because there are a lot of kind of questions that come up about how do we do this, how do we describe this, what are the decisions that we're making with those with the data model. So I think that for scalability and for other schools to be able to take this on and for us to be able to grow this, hopefully we can continue having some sort of collaborative relationship with each other past this year when this particular stage of testing is done. I think that for us, one of the things, as I mentioned, we are wanting to test this data model as a model for actually creating records beyond just the university, and the relationships that university trustees had with enslavement, but to look more in our local communities, and that so that's kind of on the horizon that I'm trying to drum up more support from different stakeholders at the university, and that also means partnering with local institutions, particularly with historical societies throughout New Jersey who often have scattered records about enslaved people related to that site, but they don't currently have the infrastructure to digitize them, to create some sort of data, to create some place where a person can go in and search for these names. And I think that creating both a crowdsourcing model for gathering these types of records from genealogists and then having a work process on our end, how do we then process that, right? Once somebody actually enters in the stuff through a crowdsourcing form, having the support to give the staff time to process those records that are coming in from different people, but also being able to work with the historical societies in New Jersey to ensure that they're able to contribute, because we definitely have interest. I mean, anytime I talk to anybody who is in this field in New Jersey, they're like, I have stuff for you. We have things. We don't know what to do with, how to make this public, and we want to build that.
As far as trying to entice other people to do this, I mean, I think I would kind of rest on the fact that there is a lot for students to be learned by doing this work. One important aspect when I ever present documents to students is to let them know that they have to be very sensitive to perspective in documents and to understand when the past is being referred to and then the present is being referred to, what time periods are referred to it. And I think the engagement with these documents is a real vivid demonstration to students of how complex those questions, those kind of simple questions can actually be. When Anna has had students work on baptismal records, she has also had them record not just the religious rite, but also childbirth events. In some cases, it can refer to subsequent illnesses in it, and so you can pull out more than one event from a very simple record, and that's very instructive for students. The other aspect that we're talking about too, and again, this is when this will become a little more real when the test site is ready, is how this fits into teaching digital literacy. How does this fit into presenting discovery tools for students? So my primary argument would be for other archivists is that there's a real instructional and learning opportunity with this, and one that can benefit a broad group of people, people who don't necessarily relate to the structure of a finding aid, and more people don't do that. I get upset that nobody reads them anymore, but the reality is that it's a structure that's very off-putting to most students, so this model is one way of bridging that.
All right, we've talked a lot about the model, and you may be wondering, well, what is it? How do we work with it? Well, we have some deliverables for the project that we've promised Mellon, and those deliverables include templates and descriptive guidelines and an aggregate model, which will be pulling all of the records that we're creating together. So we're not quite ready to deliver those yet, but keep looking at onthesegrounds.org for announcements about that. At this point, we'd like to have you ask us questions. I see one over here. I'm going to get this mic and.
Thank you to all the panelists for your presentation and for your work. I know it's tedious work. I have two questions. One is directed to Rutgers. I am curious to know whether or not you have partnered with universities in the Netherlands. As we know, the Dutch are meticulous record keepers, and I know that they have a significant amount of records and archival records within the city of Amsterdam alone, in studying the Dutch involvement in the slave trade. And then my second question is directed to everybody, which is, while I know this is an archival research project, I wondered, what your long-term plans are in engaging with descendants in the interpretation of those archives. It feels, and this is something that we're working with the University of Virginia. I'm representing the descendants of the enslaved communities at UVA, and so we are very actively engaged with the archival research that's taking place here, but bridging it to the descendants. I know Georgetown is looking at 272 enslaved laborers, and we know there are significant numbers more of the enslaved. UVA is looking at 4,000 plus and identifying those identities. And you can imagine the number of descendants that come out of those 4,000 plus.
A simple answer, no. We are not working with any universities in the Netherlands, but if you know anybody at any universities in the Netherlands, we should talk.
I guess I'll start with the descendants. At Georgetown, I think we considered as very strategic, as the thing that we needed to achieve was to be, to present in digital form the archives of the Maryland province of the Society of Jesus. We thought that was a critical first step, and on these grounds is really built upon that effort. I think it would be a very different type of project if we had not undertaken the description and processing of the archives of the Maryland province. I mean, for one thing, we were doing this work in the midst of the pandemic, and so we were able to provide digital, surrogates to Anna so that her students could do their work. I mean, that's one of the obvious things, but the bigger thing too was that we needed firmer intellectual control over it, because it really is an important step to being able to write the individual descriptions. And I should say at Georgetown, we're really now beginning to think about what the next phase of this is going to be in terms of making the records more accessible to descendants. We've had a number of efforts of, the Georgetown Slavery Project at one point tried to transcribe a key baptismal register. I have a colleague at Georgetown who has created an index using a separate scheme for some post-emancipation materials that contain some of the names of descendants. So we're really trying to figure out, and when you include the post-emancipation materials, and actually, in some ways, they're more extensive than anything else we have, but they're underutilized. But if you're looking, if you're thinking about what the descendants can use, you have to include that corpus of records in it. So we are really beginning to talk this through, and I'm hoping that we have conversations with some of the descendants that we know and come into our archives regularly, and that the school is engaged with as we begin to shape our priorities in that regard.
So at WNL, we're hoping to be able to work with the independent researchers and genealogists who are also doing research into the descendants, so that we can all help each other. There's currently 2 independent scholars who have actually discovered pockets of material that had been taken from the Rockbridge, Lexington area. So Yale has a small collection of material related to Samuel McDowell Reed, who was the lawyer who oversaw the Robinson bequest. And so there was like this time frame where we were missing what happened about the sale in the 1830s. Yeah, he found it at Yale. And another researcher then found census documents and court records related to some of the people who then were sold down in Louisiana. So we're discovering more information as independent researchers and genealogists are doing this work, and so now we're collaborating. So they're sharing what they found with us so that we could get those documents into this model as well. So we'll be able to do kind of improved visualization to kind of give a different perspective than your traditional deep reading of individual documents. And then hopefully then the next part is sharing it out even more fully and making it more comprehensive, and having our approach to adding to the model and the way that you can interact with it be receptive to different stakeholders, and to see how do they want to use this, how can we make this work for them.
The college is getting ready for its 250th anniversary, so I am hopeful. I think that this work is going to be able to enable us to leverage that anniversary to expect more from the institution. I think that it's very important to a number of us that we do engage descendant communities, and OTG has given us, I think, a structure and a set of tools for documenting that relationship. It seems ridiculous to say that we would have to prove that that relationship existed between slavery and the institution, but it is what it is, right? I mean, so I think that will be helpful to us. But Hampden-Sydney is in Prince Edward County, and some of you, probably many of you, know that that's a complicated history in its own right. And we have a very good relationship with the Moton Museum, and some of the individuals who are affected by the school closing crisis in that county have been incredibly generous with their time and their knowledge, and they are also the descendants of people who've lived in the community for a very long time. So I feel like in some ways, and I'm really a 20th century person, in terms of my own specialization. So we're sort of working backwards in that respect, and now working forwards from the 18th century. So I think that this project is, as I say, going to help us, I hope, through the anniversary and some of the existing community relationships we have, make those connections happen.
Well, I would love for you to join me in thanking our panelists. And we really appreciate your interest in the project and for your being here this afternoon. And Kurt's walking up, it looks like. Do you have anything that you? I do. I have a couple final. Sure.
Everybody stay put for just a couple minutes. I have an announcement from across the pond, and then I want to give you directions to where you can bring bread with us immediately afterward. I think everyone has earned a meal and a glass of wine.
After you're done?
You made it. Nice work. Couple quick closing remarks I want to start with. For those of you who participated in this conference for many years, you remember those heady days before the pandemic when 600 people showed up to the conference and quite a few people represented non-US institutions also attended. I'm really hoping we're going to be able to get back to that. So I want to remind you that the consortium includes institutions in 5 other countries: Canada, Colombia, England, Ireland, and Scotland. And we've been contacted by one of the English institutions. They have a major announcement coming out, and they asked me to read this statement here today before we head out. So I think this is, again, a really good reminder of the work that's going on across the pond and the transatlantic dimensions of our work. So this is a news release from the University of Bristol. Like many universities around the world, the University of Bristol has embraced the challenge of interrogating its history to learn about its own past and to use that knowledge to shape its future. This is a journey of discovery, but also one of action. The 2-year research project led by Professor Elliott on the University of Bristol's and the wider city's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade concluded earlier this year. This October, I think October is tomorrow, wow, the university is publishing the resulting report, The University of Bristol: History, the Legacies of Slavery, Anti-Racism, and the Path Toward Reconciliation. The report highlights that the university's founding in 1909 was financially supported and made possible by individuals whose families had directly or indirectly profited from the products of slavery, while in some cases also promoting the abolition of slavery. Understanding our past and its complexity provides a foundation from which to begin new conversations about how we recognize and link past practices and actions with contemporary issues and the changes we need to make to address ongoing inequalities. Following the publication of this report, the university will launch a consultation in November to hear the full range of views about the names of buildings across its campus which bear names from those founding families and other associated organizations, including Goldney, Fry, and Wills. It will use this information to inform our conclusions about building names and the representations of the university's history across its campus. This is just one of the many actions the university is taking together with its communities on campus and in the city of Bristol to address the legacy of slavery and the inequalities that we still live with today. Other actions include the Black Scholarship Program, which supports around 130 Black undergraduate and postgraduate students to study at the university via more than £1 million in scholarships over the next 4 years. Our Be More Empowered for Success program, launched in 2019, which employs and trains current Black and minority ethnic students as advocates to work with students and staff to understand challenges faced by Black students. A unique leadership program, Elevate, offers a unique opportunity for staff from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic backgrounds and identify as female to meet, share, support, and learn together from universities across the Southwest, and that's the Southwest of England. A little confusing here in the States. Please note, feedback on the report and the university's plans is welcome. Bristol's statement and their forthcoming report, I think, remind us, right, once more, global dimensions of this project. I want to let you all know, James French today alluded to this. We know there was great interest in finishing the lunch panel on the rubric. We will get this arranged. We'll be in touch, and later this fall, we will do a webinar. It may also involve an in-person event that we will broadcast live. So even if you're not in the area, you'll be able to attend, and we'll just start all over again and do that. I'm really excited to run that program. So we'll get back to that. We couldn't do it because not everyone could be here this afternoon. Quick updates regarding Ian. It doesn't seem to be doing much outside. We seem to be lucking out so far, but the worst is not here. If you've signed up for any of tomorrow's events, really everything's going to basically run as scheduled. There will be a couple small changes to the programming. So for those of you on any of the 9 o'clock in the morning events, all these meet at the Jefferson School. The Monticello tour will run as scheduled. We ask you to show up at least 15 minutes early. Descendant Myra Anderson will offer a brief perspective before the bus departs. Downtown tour registrants, I think Ian's Rain and Wind have made that really not a walk anyone's going to want to take. So we are asking all of you to just come down and join the Morven Highland event. So just be there a little bit before 9. There will be room on the bus for you. And the Morven Highland hike, for those of you who signed up for it, we're not going to do the hike. I don't think tomorrow is going to be a day we want to be covered in red clay and maybe have trees falling on us. But we have a plan. Morven and Highland, same thing. Everyone from either that downtown tour or who are on the Morven Highland hike, just show up in the morning. They're going to put you on the bus. If you want to drive your own car, you can drive your own car up to Morven. And at Morven, they're going to give you a lovely breakfast reception, talk a little bit about events there, and then bus everyone, even if you've driven over to Highland, where you'll get a free tour of Highland and their facilities, and then the bus will work its way back, return those who drove in cars to their cars at Morven, and return everyone else back to the Jefferson School. You'll be back at the Jefferson School by 1 p.m. If you're on the afternoon 1 p.m. Montpelier trip, on schedule, just show up a little bit before 1 at the Jefferson School, right? Same thing, free parking right on site, and there'll be a bus to take you up there. Last, and this is the most important thing of the day, dinner reception. We really want you to come and join us at Alumni Hall. Some technology here. Show you where you're going. I'm going to hope it works. It's gone to sleep, hasn't it? Okay, we'll do without technology. You're going to Alumni Hall. It is a quarter mile from where we are standing. So if the weather's okay and you're parked in the Central Grounds parking garage just down the hill, you're going to go exit the building on the south side, right? Go down to the first floor, walk out across that plaza. The easiest thing to do is go right over to the university bookstore like you're going into the parking deck, take the elevator or the stairs down to ground level, cross the street, turn right, so it's in that direction on Emmett Street. It's 2 blocks, a real easy walk. You can't miss it. It's a big white building. If you are driving, you are welcome to grab your car. It's got tons of parking. There's a little lot with about 20 spaces in the pull-in, the roundabout at the front of the building. If you enter there, there's also a parking lot to the right, or you can enter at either of the 2 side streets that frame the building. This is Lewis Mountain Drive or Sprigg Lane. You turn into either of those, you drive right, just as you get past Alumni Hall, you can turn in and park, and you can enter from either side of the building. Please come over and join us. This is a completely casual, have dinner, have a glass of wine, have a beer, relax, and talk with friends once more before we all start to disperse. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for a great conference. Couldn't have done it without you.